Hi everybody, welcome to this episode of the show. Before we get going, I just wanted to please ask you, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to subscribe wherever it is that you download your podcasts from, and to leave a rating and a review, because doing so really does help us to reach an ever wider audience. I very much appreciate your help in that endeavor. And I also want to encourage all of you who are listening via the audio podcast to keep in mind that much of this content is available at our YouTube channel. That's the MirYam Institute YouTube channel, MIRYAM Institute. We're really hoping to build out our number of subscribers, and there you'll get regular updates and information as you do here on the audio podcast. And we're recording this on Sunday, June 22nd, a momentous day in history. I'm as ever delighted to be joined by you, Yaakov Lappin, the in-house analyst here at the MirYam Institute, from here at the MirYam Institute studios in our offices here in Rishon LeZion. And I just want to get going really in earnest by asking you to give a quick overview of how you began this day, hearing about the news that the United States of America had decided to join the fray vis-a-vis combating and really bringing an end to the effort to bring an end to the Iranian nuclear weapons program.
So when I went to sleep, there was lots of reports about B-2 Spirit strategic bombers taking off from Missouri and where they headed. Everyone was saying where they headed. You've got lots of OSCENT reports on social media, especially on X. And most of the accounts were saying, they're headed to Guam and Diego Garcia. But a minority of people were saying, they've been refueled. They could go straight to Iran. And it turns out that they went straight to Iran and bombed 3 nuclear sites using the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, which is the largest conventional ordnance known to man in terms of the public sphere. I don't know of a larger bomb. It's something like 30,000 bombs or 30,000 pounds. Maybe, that translates to 14,000 kilos approximately, if my conversion rate is correct. It's absolutely enormous. And they dropped several of these on Fordo, that nuclear site that Israel had left untouched until that moment, for precisely that reason, for enabling the Americans to step in, because the Americans have the best ordnance and the platform, the B-2, to launch it. And Israel does not have these capabilities. It has other incredible capabilities. This is reserved for the United States. But interestingly, it also struck Natanz and Isfahan.
Yeah.
Now, the really interesting thing is that Isfahan is a place where, according to Israeli intelligence assessments, the Iranians were supposed to take uranium that was enriched to 60% and bring it up to 90%. So the big question is, did this strike by the Americans bury the 60% enriched uranium? Did it put it under some sort of avalanche of rubble? Was that the goal of the strike? We don't know yet. Something that it's really worth monitoring, because Isfahan has already been badly damaged by the Israeli Air Force. So what are the Americans targeting there? Maybe it's that. And Natanz also, it's very interesting to know what was hit there, because the Israeli Air Force struck Natanz, the enrichment facility, left it inoperable. Very interesting to me that the Americans struck that as well. And they also used Tomahawk missiles that were fired from submarines, cruise missiles. So this is really the United States coming in and basically flexing its unparalleled bombing capabilities and placing the Iranian leadership in a real bind. If the Iranian leadership responds against American targets, and they've got the ability to do that because they still have a large number of short-range and medium-range ballistic missiles that are aimed at American bases in the Middle East. If they strike that, they're risking overwhelming American response. We've got U.S. aircraft carrier groups in the region. We've got U.S. air bases. They can come down on the Iranians like a ton of bricks, in addition to everything that Israel's doing. Yeah. Do they block the Straits of Hormuz, as they've been threatening to do? The Iranian parliament passed basically authorization to do that, but they're not the decision makers. The decision makers are obviously Ayatollah Khamenei and the IRGC. They sit together on a committee called the Iranian Supreme National Security Council, which is basically the Israeli security cabinet. Or do they do nothing? Do they stand down? And Benjamin, honestly, I have no idea what they're going to do. I don't think that it's advisable to get into the head of jihadists at a tactical level. It's not really possible. We'll have to watch this space. This is an incredible moment. The United States has joined Israel in its fight against this global menace. It's a historic moment. I think it's a very important moment for the free world. There's American recognition that this is a threat to its security as well is vital. A massive message was sent out, and we'll have to see how this plays out. The last thing I would say is let's not forget that throughout this entire time, including after the American attack, the Israeli Air Force continues to be active throughout Iran, striking its ballistic missile program, striking nuclear targets, centrifuge production zones, and all kinds of IRGC commanders that were involved in supporting Hamas, Hezbollah, what they call the proxy plan. This is ongoing constantly as we speak, hasn't stopped, hasn't slowed down.
Yeah, so I think that it's interesting to look at some of the words of President Trump and the very brief statement that he made. Typically, President Trump is somebody who loves time in front of the media, who's very given to going off script and sort of ad-libbing as he does that. He didn't do that this time. I think his statement was 2 to 3 minutes long in its full duration. He was flanked there by Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. It's interesting that he was flanked by the three of those. Incidentally, one of the individuals who was not flanking the president was, of course, his Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, with whom he's been at odds lately in a very brazen, flagrant, overt way. Many times between the rumor mill cranking up, saying that America was likely to join this operation against Iran's nuclear weapons program, the press would pepper Donald Trump with the idea that his Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, had testified, I believe, in March, that as far as she was aware, as far as the United States position went, the Iranians were not pursuing their nuclear weapons program, which just rings as complete nonsense, quite frankly. But Donald Trump very swiftly, twice, openly, in the last week alone, said she's wrong. On one occasion, and the second occasion, I think he said, I don't care what she says. So it's notable that she was absent. It's also important to notice that Gabbard was not present, and Gabbard is somebody who is very much aligned with the isolationist wing of the Republican Party. She's formerly a Democrat. She ran for the nomination to become president of the United States as a Democrat. She's since moved far away from that, defected from that, in no small part because of her race for the nomination. But she is aligned with that isolationist wing. She was not present, but another person who also is perceived very much to be aligned with that was present, and I'm referring, of course, to Vice President J.D. Vance. So it's very interesting. I wonder, incidentally, it's a bit of a diversion here, but I wonder if Gabbard's days are numbered, although she has made a public statement coming into line with what President Trump has done and what he said.
Yeah, and just to...
But I do wonder if her days are numbered there. It's difficult for me to... By the way, just before you respond to that point, and then we'll come to the President's statement. Pardon me?
It's more of a question.
I'll go for it. I may not have the answer yet, of course.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but Tulsi Gabbard represents 18 American intelligence agencies, is that correct? As Director of National Intelligence?
Yeah, when they were all integrated.
They're all integrated. So when she says...
Which, by the way, didn't used to be the case.
Right.
That was one of the challenges. This is something that's come out, I believe, post 9/11.
Post 9/11.
It started to integrate. By the way, Israel is doing a much better job at integrating its various intelligence arms. We saw that between the Israeli Air Force and the Mossad latterly here in Iran.
Especially between the Mossad and the IDI, the Israeli Defense Intelligence Directorate.
But go on, tell me
which did have problems in the past coordinating, but now they absolutely work in new ways. So the question is, when she said what she said, and this is important, I don't think it's a diversion, was she representing the intelligence assessments of the United States intelligence community? Because essentially, if she was, what happened here is that Trump was briefed on the findings by the Mossad and by the Israeli Defense Intelligence Directorate, and said, listen, these conclusions are the right ones, and you guys are wrong. And then if Tulsi Gabbard is coming back and saying, actually, they were weeks away, and I was wrong, is she actually saying that her own intelligence community was underestimating the threat? It's a question mark.
Did you
what do you
say misunderestimating?
I was going to say
There's no such word. You're going back to the Commander-in-Chief during 9/11. That was a very well-known
Really?
ill-spoken phrase by George W. Bush.
I had no idea.
Underestimating.
So
I appreciate
now
you
I understand
correcting
Bush.
yourself.
I understand Bush because no, I was thinking about one word and then interrupted myself with another word.
You did well. You did well. But I don't know who Tulsi Gabbard was representing or not. What I do know is that there was a lot. It's not shuttle diplomacy, but certainly shuttle briefings taking place between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, and also Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer, who is very much Benjamin Netanyahu's right-hand man, somebody who eschews the press, focuses on his role, and is, I believe, the closest confidant that the Prime Minister has at this time. He's also an American, born, raised, and educated. I think he was born and raised in Miami Beach, went to university at the Wharton School in University of Pennsylvania, then went on to do the degree of Prime Ministers at Oxford University. I think he was a Rhodes Scholar as he did so, and then attached himself to Natan Sharansky, and after attaching himself to Natan Sharansky, was recommended by Sharansky to Prime Minister Netanyahu when Netanyahu was actually in the political wilderness, just to give an idea of how long-standing that relationship is. So Dermer is a very fearless, forthright Israeli who speaks fluent American. And has a very clear worldview, and his worldview is that of a right. He views everything through the prism of economics, right? Just about everything through the prism of economics. Has a very conservative worldview. He's to the right of Benjamin Netanyahu when it comes to his economic worldview, economic philosophy, if you like. And he and the Prime Minister have certainly been briefing the President. So I don't know how the President responded to briefings by Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know if Tulsi Gabbard provided those briefings. But I do know that Donald Trump's conclusion was aligned with the conclusions that Benjamin Netanyahu and Ron Dermer have. Incidentally, I don't believe. No, I was going to say that Donald Trump doesn't have an equivalent of a Ron Dermer, but he does. I think Marco Rubio is that individual at this time. You remember that Mike Waltz was essentially booted from the administration. He was the national security advisor, a former Green Beret, rose to the rank of colonel in the United States Army, then was a congressman in Florida, and then ultimately became Trump's national security advisor, exited as a result of the snafu over the Signal app. And also some conspiracy theorists felt that he was Israel's man on the inside of the White House, which of course is total and utter nonsense. And Marco Rubio was tapped to be not only Secretary of State, which is what he currently is, but also National Security Advisor to the President. So when I said that he was flanking Donald Trump in his capacity of Secretary of State, that's really only half the story.
Yeah, this is a blow to the isolationists. That's the bottom line of all of this.
Massive blow to the isolationists, and in addition to it being a blow to the isolationists, it's also a blow to those who I believe, and I know that they run around saying, oh, it's very easy to brand us as anti-Semites, but I believe them to be anti-Semites. I believe people like Tucker Carlson clearly have a problem with Jews. Right? I believe that people like Candace Owens, I know Candace Owens clearly has a problem with Jews. I believe that Dave Smith, who is Jewish himself, clearly has a problem with his Jewish identity. These are isolationists who have really fashioned themselves into being something of Trump whisperers, perhaps Vance whisperers. At least that was the perception. Well, it seems that if they were whispering, somebody else was shouting, and it was the shouts that were heard. And those were the shouts of the Prime Minister and the shouts of Ron Dermer. So I'm actually very comforted in that sense. Incidentally, again, without wanting to go on too much of a diversion, we actually saw that Tucker Carlson, who was campaigning against any strike against the Iranians whatsoever, he actually contacted President Trump and apologized to him. We know that because Donald Trump said from the Resolute desk as much, that Carlson had contacted him, had reached out to apologize to him. I can't remember if he said that he accepted the apology or not. It doesn't matter. But at the very least, yes, you're absolutely right. It's a huge blow to the isolationists. Tell me why that's important to you.
Well, because we are talking about a world in which politics and security can't really be divorced. Let's be realistic. And I think that President Trump's decision was at least partly influenced by his calculations on how his own Republican movement would perceive his decision. And he must have made the decision that the isolationists may be punching above their weights, that they're not as influential as they think they are, that he can market this to parts of his base. I'm sure he had to think about that to a certain degree, because we know that he was, trying to figure out whether to go or not go on this strike. And knowing, President Trump's calculations, I don't believe that his calculations were totally divorced of politics and the way his movement would receive his decision. I'm sure that he thought about it, he factored it in, as well as the intelligence, and then he made his decision.
That's interesting, but he's less, I don't think that you're wrong, but he's less prone to those considerations than would typically be the case, in no small part because he's now in his final term as President of the United States. Again, conspiracy theories notwithstanding, presuming that he's not seeking to run for another term some way, somehow. Incidentally, what's happened here in Iran does have implications for that, because his loyalists in the MAGA base, such as, for example, Steve Bannon, was the one front and center saying he will have another term. We're working on it right now. Steve Bannon also opposed this strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities. So it's possible that, they've sort of been flanked in terms of the issues that they were promoting, and each of those issues has been knocked down. So just as they were wrong about Donald Trump's willingness to hit Iran, or the appropriate propriety of him hitting Iran, perhaps they're also wrong about this notion that no matter what, he will be having a third term. So, but that's important to this discussion, because, of course, Donald Trump is less prone, in fact, he's not prone at all, to re-election considerations. And therefore, he has something of a free hand, I wouldn't say entirely so, but a freer hand, if you like, to do that which he believes is correct and proper and in the interest of the United States of America. And this very much is in the interest of the United States of America. And Yaakov, with your permission, I'm going to read a little bit about what Donald Trump actually said during that brief press briefing that he gave. Let me just bring it up here, because I want to be faithful to what it was that he actually said. We'll go through the president's words. So he said, and I've abridged this slightly, but he said that, quote, the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Let's put a pin in that. Let's talk about whether we know that or not. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, he went on to say, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. Right? That's something that is an allusion to, with an A, to what the Israelis have managed to achieve over the skies of Tehran at the very least. He went on to say, for 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people. He's referring here to Americans, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. Hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and throughout the world have died as a direct result of their hate. So many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani, who Trump dispatched during his first term as president. He then went on to say some things that I thought were absolutely incredible. He said, I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And then he moved on and he said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran, far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. If peace does not come quickly, we will go after those targets with precision, speed, and skill. And Yaakov, continuing the incredible statements within this one statement, he concluded by saying, God bless the Middle East, God bless Israel, and God bless America, but not before he thanked God himself. What do you make of this brief statement? There's so much in there. We could do a whole show just about that, quite frankly.
Yeah, so from an Israeli perspective, the most interesting thing he said is the threat that he put on the table to the Iranians. And he said, look, if you touch any of our interests, and this is how I'm reading it, the United States is going to respond with overwhelming firepower. I don't think he meant if you continue to attack Israel, the United States will respond. I think he's leaving that to the Iranians and to us. But he is saying that if they attack either the U.S. or global economic interests, the Straits of Hormuz, that's how I'm reading it, the Iranians are going to find themselves in a position that's even worse, substantially worse. And when he talks about other targets, I think he's referring to the kind of fuel port energy kind of targets that can really destabilize the Iranian economy and bring that economy to a paralysis, to a grinding halt. I think that's what he's threatening. I think that's the gun on the table that he's placed, and it's obviously something that the Iranians cannot ignore, and they are deliberating over that threat right now, I think, as they're deciding how they're going to respond, the scope of their response. So that opens up one avenue, and then the second avenue is the Israeli-Iranian situation. Now, I think President Trump alluded to the fact more than once, not just during the speech, but even before the strike, that the Israeli Air Force is winning. The Israeli Air Force is, by every objective parameter, is winning this war against the Iranians. The Iranians are progressively able to fire less and less missiles. Every day we're seeing the trend. And the Israeli Air Force, its munitions hit 100% of their targets. So the asymmetry is only growing, and there's nothing the Iranians can directly do about that. By the way, I'll just add an asterisk. They can still activate their international terrorism network, something we have to be very vigilant about. But at the end of the day, the Iranians are in a very, very bad situation, both vis-a-vis Israel and vis-a-vis the United States. And they're going to have to decide, and this is what Trump is telling them, are they going to stand down and disengage, cut their losses, or are they going to go all out and basically commit strategic suicide? The only thing I would add to this is that it's not as an obvious decision at all, because even if you want to think about it rationally, which...
Absolutely. I know exactly what you're going to say, and you've been saying this for so many months. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I think that I think that what you're going to say, Yaakov, is that if you try and assign yourself to the task of thinking this through rationally, you're inherently going to fail, because this doesn't work with jihadists, right? Is that
first of all, 100% for sure, yes. But this is what I was going to differentiate myself from that, and try to pretend that I'm a rational Iranian decision maker, even though it's somewhat of an oxymoron at this stage. Okay, and if I decide to stand down, then what I'm facing is the Iranian people. The Iranian people have now seen that the Iranian regime, that all of its claims are wrong. Every single one of them. Yeah. Hezbollah was a false investment, false claim, tens of billions of dollars per year down the drain.
I think it's actually $500 billion that it's estimated
in total
that the Iranians have squandered and plundered and wasted in pursuit of the annihilation of the State of Israel by way of proxies, nuclear weapons programs, nuclear scientists, and ballistic missile programs.
Yeah.
It's unfathomable, really.
Right, and it's all gone down the drain. Hezbollah is not in this war at the time of this recording, and even if they enter, they have limited means to do so, and they would only harm their position even further. Hamas out of the picture, another massive Iranian investment. Not only that, also the Israeli Air Force is picking off the IRGC commanders who managed Hamas, managed Hezbollah, the commander of the 190th Division in the Quds Force, the commander of the Jerusalem branch in the Quds Force. These guys were eliminated on Saturday. They're more important than Qasem Soleimani for Iran. So the personnel, and these are not easily replaced people, they represent years and years of experience.
Not at all. By the way, they never recovered from the elimination of Soleimani, in my opinion. There was
Nasrallah
no grand
also.
strategist there, really, that was at the same height as Soleimani, figuratively. Finish your thought, and then I want to get into some other aspects of the same speech from perhaps a non-Israeli position.
Sure. So whenever the Iranians decide to call it quits, they're going to have to face their people. And the one question they might be asking themselves is, from what position do we want to do that from? Is it going to? It's like a gambler. You're going to keep losing and losing until you cut your losses, or are you going to stop now? Whatever they do, they have already been discredited in the eyes of most Iranians. That's my view. I can't prove it. I believe that most Iranians do not want this regime. And I believe that now they see an opportunity for an uprising. I think that the Iranian regime is more exposed to an uprising than it has ever been since 1979, because they've lost complete control of the situation. All of their promises, threats have been proven to be hollow and empty. And this is a disaster in terms of their domestic legitimacy.
But I think there's another point there, Yaakov, and here I say it as an Israeli who's sitting here in a country that has come under fire, as everybody knows, from ballistic missiles that have been aimed towards, incidentally, our citizenry, predominantly our citizenry. We had severe impacts just this morning. We had those very early this morning. What time did those come in, by the way?
I think that was about 7:30 in the morning? Was it?
Probably somewhere right around there. I've sort of lost track, because we're awake, we're not awake, we go to the
7:30.
shelter, we come back. But one of the prevailing signals that we receive from our government here is its profound ability and its profound efforts to defend and to protect its citizens.
Right.
Now, not all of them. Unfortunately, there are those that we've lost, and each one of those who we've lost in the course of this war is a tragedy. Everybody laments the loss of every life here in Israel, always. I don't think that there's any exception to that. I don't think we're ever indifferent to that. I think that we read about the 1, the 2, the 10, the 5, however many it may be, and it really hits us. We feel it, we carry it around viscerally. In Iran, yes, you're right, they certainly understand that the Iranian doctrine was wrong, that the mullah's doctrine was wrong, was flawed, that Hezbollah was a falsehood. It was all a great big fallacy. But I think most importantly, what they will realize is the total inability of that regime to protect them, the Iranian people.
Absolutely.
And that's a separate point, and possibly even a more of a motivating factor. And I think that to get a regime to fall, you first of all need a regime that's teetering, right? We're in that situation, I would say, but you also, to your point, need a people who are willing to rise up.
Sure.
So we'll wait and see about that. I know that there is some discord in Israel about whether or not regime change in Iran is one of the war aims here. The Prime Minister does not seem to think that it's one of the war aims. Minister of Defense Katz said that it was, but I understand that he was rebuked for saying so.
Yeah, he was.
Incidentally, his rhetoric's pretty hard-hitting. He knows how to make a threat, that guy.
Honestly, everybody criticizes him. I think
he's been very effective.
I think this is what a defense minister should be saying to enemies at a time of war.
Wait, you're saying people criticize what, him or his rhetoric?
Both.
I haven't heard that so much, actually.
Oh, yeah. Especially online.
I think that Katz knows exactly how to look down lens and say to the bullies of Iran, come at us, and you may walk over, but you'll be limping back, right? At the very least.
He's a defense minister at a time of war against an existential threat. This is exactly what I want to hear.
I think his words are completely appropriate.
Unpopular opinion, by the way, in some quarters here.
Listen, if we were only going to say that which is popular, people probably wouldn't listen to us. So I do want to talk a little bit about things from an American point of view, and it goes within that speech, and then we should move on to some other points. There was this idea that Donald Trump was deliberating over this because he wanted to see how he could thread the needle, do that which he had obviously become convinced was needed, while also maintaining his base. I've already expressed that he's not so vulnerable to the whims of the base because he's not seeking re-election. However, it may well be that he wants Trumpism to continue beyond his term, and he wants an appropriate inheritor
legacy
of that,
also,
right? And continued influence beyond his time in the Oval Office. But I don't want to. I think people need to recognize. I don't know the degree of faith that Donald Trump has, but I do know the degree of faith. I can't look into another man's soul. I've no idea. I do, however, know the degree of faith that an enormous segment of his base has, and that's the evangelical Christians. And so when Donald Trump says, I want to thank God, which is a remarkable statement, he may well be doing that out of sincerity, but whether or not that's the case, and again, I'm not really questioning that. I know that people like to question people's sanity and people's faith and people's morality. I don't know who among us is qualified to do that, but I do believe it's a message to the evangelical base, which is to say, we're doing God's work here.
Right.
We're doing God's work here. This is why you put me here. This is why the evangelical base put me here. Those of you who did, by the way, they're not a monolith, but many of them will have voted for Donald Trump. I can assure you of that.
Sure.
I think that that's very, very important to keep in mind, because there is potentially some politicking. Now, I also want to draw the distinction and really the contrast between the president saying, I want to thank or congratulate Bibi Netanyahu in this speech, versus the FBB that he was recorded saying to Barak Ravid, an Israeli journalist, when Donald Trump was deeply, deeply disappointed about the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu telephoned Joe Biden when Biden won the election back in 2020. Donald Trump was very angry. What a difference a day makes.
Yeah, seriously. But this goes back to other things. I mean, we're kind of getting dragged into politics here, but I guess it's inevitable. But
I'll bring it back on track.
No, it's okay. Listen, there's a really big argument, which I think is a ridiculous argument, but it's happening here in Israel. To what degree should Netanyahu get credit for this war, for this operation, for this stage?
Wait, you mean for the Americans joining, or for the stage we're
all of it
separate to that?
Okay. From June 13th until now.
Massive credit.
Well, of course, because not only did his insistence on systematically fighting Hamas and then Hezbollah and then reaching the head of the octopus was that the right way to go, but it also enabled us to isolate the Iranians and to deal with them at a state-on-state level rather than giving in and letting the proxies basically remain intact and then having to deal with them plus Iran when Iran decides to break through to a nuclear weapon. So he absolutely does. And also this was a point that
if he doesn't get the credit, who does?
Well, this is it. So on Channel 12, I'll do
your favorite channel.
Yeah, my favorite channel. There was a very, let's call it a heated debate between the military analyst, Neil Dvory, who said the credit goes to the intelligence, to the Air Force, et cetera, and to, I believe he's their diplomatic, he's a political analyst, Yaron Avraham, who said Netanyahu also gets credit. And there was a back and forth over this, right? It's a ridiculous argument.
I can't believe what you're telling me.
Yeah.
I mean, firstly, by the way, sorry again,
I know it's provocative, I know.
No, but obviously there's credit, just to be clear where I am, obviously there's credit to the intelligence community, obviously there's credit to the defense establishment.
First and foremost, I'll tell you why, because the intelligence community raised the flag and said, here's an existential threat forming. They did what they were supposed to do, and they issued a timely threat, and the Air Force put together...
I just think there's plenty of credit to go around.
Absolutely.
Right? So go on, carry on with this argument.
So what Yaron Avraham was saying was, listen, you can't go around and say, Netanyahu is responsible for the 7th of October, but gets no credit for this success.
Correct.
Either he has no responsibility for the 7th of October and no credit here, or he's responsible for this and he gets credit here. You cannot cherry pick and have it both ways, which I happen to think is an excellent argument and absolutely true and should be obvious and self-evident. And yet in this hyper-politicized media landscape here in Israel, we are still seeing pundits get into this crazy trap of, am I in favor or against Bibi Netanyahu? And that in this sort of dichotomy takes one of the most incredible military successes of the State of Israel, strategic successes in my view, and reduces it to that, which I think is stunning. It's terrible. It's a sign of how impoverished some of the discussion here is. You also see it on X. I don't think most of the Israeli people are involved in this kind of shallow discussion, but it's certainly something that's happening in the Twitter sphere and in the mainstream media landscape.
Well,
bringing it to your attention. I bet you're glad you know about it now.
You know, it's shaped my opinion not one jot, actually.
Well, of course, I would imagine.
Dross. It's obviously a completely vapid conversation, and I think that anybody with anything between their ears well understands that an operation like this does not get carried out without the say-so of the Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
The say-so, the accompaniment.
Yeah, and not only that, Yaakov, you know, you've rightly said that the intelligence community deserves credit because they put it on the table and said, this is the time, this is the moment, here is the threat, we have to do something about it. But I look, you can't overlook the fact that the Prime Minister has been speaking about this for 40 years, right?
100%.
Incidentally, much to my frustration.
Yeah.
Many, many times I've said to myself, stop talking, crack on with this, we can do it. We don't need to be fearful of this proxy and that proxy and the Iranian rhetoric, which I'll come back to perhaps if we have time. I want to talk now about the Prime Minister's statement because that was another uncanny statement. And again, I'm referring to the notes here. It's an abridged version, folks, but here it is. Within his speech, he said, "Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things, but in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed." History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons, that familiar refrain that he always spoke about. The world's most dangerous regime must not be permitted to take possession of the world's most dangerous weapons. Back to President Trump, his leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. And then he said, and again it's an abridged version, but he said, first comes strength, then comes peace, which of course is a derivative of the Jewish prayer, Hashem oz la'amo yiten, Hashem yavarech et amo v'shalom. God will give his people strength, God will bless his people with peace. People who analyze Jewish texts often point to the order of those statements within the statement, namely, first comes strength. Hashem oz la'amo yiten. God will give his people strength. Hashem yavarech et amo v'shalom. God will bless his people with peace. And the argument has always been that order is not arbitrary.
Right.
In other words, if the Jewish people do not learn to stand up and fight and defend themselves, there won't be any peace because you won't be around. Right? So again, profound references to God.
Sure.
Profound references to God, and also, incidentally, profound votes of thanks and congratulations to his opposite number, President Donald Trump.
Right.
So these two speeches almost mirroring one another in terms of the themes that they hit.
So it turns out that he hasn't lost Trump, but we heard all the time in the media that he's lost Trump and that the relationship is gone.
Mm-hmm.
More fake news, Benjamin.
And what do you think about this reference to Judaism, to a Jewish text within that speech? Do you attach any significance to it?
100%. I mean, first of all, I learned from what you've just told me. Look, I think that we need that connection. You know, when we talk about fateful decisions and going to war for our existence, if we don't touch our roots, and this is part of our roots, it's the tradition that actually brings us back to this land to begin with, and why we're here and not in some other country. This is our historic homeland. Our ancestors wrote these texts. These are very deep-seated, I would call them almost sort of cultural DNA. It's our cultural DNA. It gets passed on from one generation to the next. Everybody has a different level of observance. Some people are totally secular. That's totally fine. I'm secular. Some people are religious. It doesn't matter. The point is, we cannot deny who we are and where we come from. So these texts are absolutely the right thing to say, because we need to touch something that's deeper than just what's happening today. Yeah. We need to touch our history. I think it strengthens us. It reminds us of who we are. I'm all in favor of it if it's done well.
I love that phrase, Yaakov. I love that phrase. Hashem oz la'amo yiten, Hashem yavarech et amo v'shalom. God will give his people strength. God will bless his people with peace. I'll tell you something, Yaakov. I much prefer that to the tikkun olam neurosis that has spread throughout far too great a percentage of the Jewish ranks throughout the diaspora. Sorry to be so pointed about it, but give me that I'll stand up and defend our people anytime. Before I will run around and repair the rights and the ills of everybody else. Yeah, exactly. We can get to that, but first, to your point, let's survive.
And then we can be a light unto the nations, which is also very much something that I think I didn't used to take maybe that phrase as seriously as I should have. But now when I think about it, when you think about, first of all, look at what's going on. Israel is the country that's first in line, on the front line against the Iranian jihadist menace. This is a global menace which would have threatened the entire world, would have linked up with Russia, is already beginning to do that, and other countries that are interested in undermining the whole world order. Is this not a light onto nations by putting this threat back into its box, by pushing the threat back many, many, many months, perhaps years, perhaps forever? We'll see what happens with this regime. The technology that's used to do this, the willingness of the population to deal with this kind of firepower.
Not just to deal with it.
And not be cowed.
Not be cowed, but also beyond that, and it really does bear mentioning. It's this population almost in its entirety that is drafted for this.
Right.
They're not. In other words, it's not just a percentage. Not to demean what other countries have that can have a professional military, but this is a draft military, and so every single Israeli, just about. Of course, there's the whole controversy about the Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox, but the vast preponderance of Israelis really do have skin in this game, and they're willing to put the skin in that game time and time and time again.
Yeah. Every Israeli civilian's got skin in the game, even if they're not in the military. I mean, I'm not in the military, but I got missiles, coming down in my direction and my family's direction.
Absolutely.
There's
and your kids will one day be in the military.
In a number of years.
You made the decision to come here when you didn't have to come here.
Exactly.
And everybody's got skin in the game.
Exactly.
And I'll come back to that in a moment, but I just want to deal with a couple of other points, Yaakov. The first one that I want to talk about briefly, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, which is the response of the Iranians to this. Now, Donald Trump made a very, very clear, I would say, pair of threats, right, in his speech, but he also absolutely left the door open for them to make peace. He did not say, we're coming to change the regime, as Minister of Defense Katz over here said, basically. Donald Trump said, you must now make peace, better come back to the negotiating table.
Yeah.
And he warned that if they decided to be bellicose and jingoistic and to attack American facilities and so on, that there would be consequences, and those consequences would play out against a far easier backdrop for those. What do you think is going to be the consequence here from the Iranians towards the Americans? I'm going to go ahead and say it's going to be extremely limited. I'm much more concerned about what the Iranian response will be toward what I would define as softer targets, namely diaspora, Jewish establishments, communities. I've called upon the diaspora as best they're able, as best I'm able, to please fortify their facilities, their synagogues, their schools, their youth clubs, their summer camps. Right?
Everything.
Summer camps are coming into session now.
Every concentration.
So important. Everything. Don't assume that because you have a camp taking place in the middle of a forest somewhere in Pennsylvania, that they can't reach you there. Instead, presume that you are potentially in their crosshairs, and do everything you can to at once provide a normal environment for your Jewish children, while ensuring that you step up to a very significant degree the security around those facilities. But what do you think that you're likely to see here from the Iranians?
Benjamin, I've been asked this a few times today. I'm not going to guess, because I really think that it's impossible. It's impossible to guess. What I think is that whatever they do, they're going to find themselves in trouble. Whether they act or they don't act, they're going to find themselves in trouble. I think that they will, at least at the symbolic level, likely do something to be seen by their base. When I say their base, I'm talking about whatever it is, the 20, the 30%, hardline fundamentalist Shiite, usually rural and poor areas of Iran. This is their population base, the members of the Basij militia. They want to see this regime do something after all these years of promising.
Sure.
Okay, so the question is, will they do the very minimal thing? Maybe they'll fire a few missiles and the Americans will hit back symbolically, and will they call it a day? Or will they miscalculate once again and do something that will cause the Americans to come down on them like a ton of bricks? That's a big question. I don't have the answer. I don't think that they themselves have yet made the decision. They're probably deliberating over that right now in some bunker in Tehran. I think that's what's being discussed. So I don't think we can get into their heads. And ultimately it's a tactical decision with strategic implications. But whatever they do, they're going to have to face, as I said, the Iranian people. So the question is, from what stage will they prefer to do that? Will it be after more damage? Will it be after more American missiles? Will it be after more Israeli airstrikes? Or will they try now to take the off-ramp that has been presented to them? I don't know. I really don't know.
If prologue, and you go based on, for example, their response after Soleimani was dispatched, probably not a great deal.
Yeah.
Probably not a great deal against the Americans. I mean, I remember that what you just described is what actually took place.
That's right.
They made an announcement. They telegraphed the fact that they were going to attack American installations. The service personnel were largely moved out of harm's way. The munitions were fired. They went up in the air. They landed, but it didn't cause a great deal of damage, not to trivialize any damage that was caused. And that was sort of the face-saving effort. I don't think people should be intimidated by the bluster of these Iranian ayatollahs. I've really had enough of it.
Yeah, intimidated for sure not. I just don't think that they're predictable. But I don't
think they're predictable either. But except for what is highly predictable, which is that they come out with these ridiculous, nonsensical, idiotic, imbecilic, aggressive statements time and time again that everybody seems to listen to. The gates of hell will be opened. Allah will this, and the Prophet will that.
But that's why I say that the only important
really can't stand how intimidated people have become by these statements for far too long. And I'm not just being brave after the fact. I've said it many times. This is all dross. It's all complete dross, and they needed to be checked much earlier, much sooner. That's, by the way, my one criticism of what's gone on. It should never have gotten to this stage, in my opinion.
Well, look, I think that as soon as they had proxies surrounding us with this ring of fire, it was already very late.
Yes, I agree.
But I think that, the thing with with what they're going to do and the intimidation and all of that, honestly, Benjamin, I don't think it's that important. I think the most important thing is that they have their capabilities removed, and they're never, as long as this regime exists, never allowed to rebuild.
Yeah.
And that brings me to what you were saying about, will they come back to the negotiation table, yes or no? I don't think it matters, because at the end of the day, if they go back to the negotiation table, that could be meaningless. They could, behind Trump's back, once again try and rebuild.
Of course.
And the main thing is that the U.S. gives us the green light and understands and supports our need to enforce the gains that were made in this war, to make sure that they are not temporary. And just like in Lebanon, Hezbollah said, okay, we'll enter into a truce, violated it the next day, but suddenly found itself day after day hit from the air by the Israeli Air Force, and suddenly its violations are being enforced against it. That has to be the situation, in my view, with Iran. I don't care what they say, and I don't care what they sign. What I care about is what they do on the ground, and for Israel to have the right to enforce whatever side agreement we reach with the United States. I think that's the most important thing.
So just a couple of facts, and then I'm going to return to what you just mentioned, and I think we should close out on that theme. With regard to Fordo, just for the listeners, 162 tons of explosives were dropped on the target in Fordo. 12 13-ton bombs were dropped to detonate 90 meters below ground. That's in Fordo. Yet to verify that it's been destroyed, but I'm very confident that the assessments are on and are ongoing. Then Isfahan. 30. This is the one that I really want you to weigh in on, Yaakov. 30 Tomahawks fired from U.S. nuclear-powered submarines over a distance of 700 kilometers. That's quite a phenomenal
Sure,
achievement.
These are cruise missiles flying low.
Right. I want you to talk more about it for our listeners. I just want to go through some of the aspects of this raid in Natanz. B-2 bombers again hit the nuclear plant there in Natanz.
With MOPs.
It was with the bombs that you mentioned at the top of the program. It was incidentally planned to take place during a rather moonlightless night. So that just goes to show you've got the new tech, but you've also got the realities of the world, and it does make a difference to this very day.
Sure.
And I'd actually just like to ask you, please, to weigh in on the firing of those Tomahawks from
at Isfahan.
Yeah.
So first of all, what I'm interested in is the target, right? Because Isfahan is a large complex of nuclear activity. It's been repeatedly, at least 2 Israeli waves have targeted Isfahan, including a second wave on Saturday. So we've hit it again. What are the Americans hitting? I think it's got something to do with that 60% enriched uranium. Now, this is a risky target. You don't want to spread this uranium all around. So I want to know if they buried it, if that was the goal of that strike or not. I suspect that it was, but I don't have any confirmation from that whatsoever. And I know that this is something that, let's say, the public BDA, the Battle Damage Assessment, has yet to touch upon. So it's something that I'm watching very closely. And listen, the cruise missiles coming out of U.S. subs, actually old strike technology, one of the oldest. Something the Americans have had for decades, and yet still very few countries in the world, and I stress very few, are able to do that. It's a small reminder that the Americans don't have to bring these strategic bombers over from Missouri or Guam every time they want to strike. They've got subs, they've got carrier strike groups, they've got destroyers. they can bring in firepower from multiple directions, pretty much 360 degrees, in ways that no other country in the world, including Israel, with all of its incredible capabilities, can do. It's a nice little reminder, not only to the Middle East, but some of America's global adversaries, and this may have been an extra motivation, I think, maybe for the White House. Nice little reminder of who the world's leading military superpower still is.
It eludes me at the moment. I can't quite remember who it was. As soon as you mention it, if you can recall, it'll jolt my memory, of course. But very early on in the first Trump administration, we saw the deployment of Tomahawk missiles towards a target in the Middle East. Can you remind me who that was? If you don't have it at the top of your head, I'll look it up. But
not immediately. No.
Anyway, we've seen it before. We've seen similar situations. What I don't think we've seen before is that 6 B-52 bombers participated in flights that were 37 hours long, Yaakov. 37 hours long without Twitter, right? Without Twitter. So it's quite a phenomenal feat that the Americans have carried out here.
Yeah.
I just want to say that there, of course, has been a response, and the response isn't something that we should skirt over. I again want to just be faithful to the facts, which is why I'm referring to the notes. 35 ballistic missiles were fired at Israel today. 83 were injured in Israel, although lightly injured, all of them. No severe injuries as a result of that particular barrage of attacks. And Israel still enjoys near complete control over the skies of Tehran. Another thing that we shouldn't be diverted away from is that this is, I've said it a couple of times, this is the concluding theme that I'd like us to wrap with. It's very easy to look at what's taken place since October the 7th and to say, well, there was that war against Hamas, and there was that war against Hezbollah, and now there's the war against Iran. But no one should view it in those terms, in my opinion. This is one long war. And if there was a reminder needed, if there was any reminder needed, we actually, just today, inside the Gaza Strip, extricated and brought home for burial 3 dead hostages that were seized on October the 7th. Those 3 hostages were Shai Levinson, Ofra Kedar, and Jonathan Samareno. All 3 of those have been brought home by the Israeli Defense Forces in consort with the Shin Bet for burial here in Israel. So all aspects of this war are still ongoing.
Saeed Izzadi is the name of an IRGC Quds force commander who was killed on Saturday, or the IDF announced his elimination on Saturday. He was the commander of the Jerusalem branch of the Quds force. This man had a central role in October 7th. The Iranians enabled the October 7th terrorist attack, the mass murder attack. Without the Iranians, this attack would never have happened. And so it's all part of one big war, Benjamin, absolutely. And every time that we were fighting until now, we were fighting the tentacles, the proxies of Iran, just as Iran had intended for its proxies to do most of the fighting, to absorb most of the return fire. This is the stage that Iran did not intend for, did not plan for. This isn't the war that they expected, and that's why they're at a serious, serious disadvantage. And it's really because that at no point during this war did Israel say, we're calling it quits, we're going to leave it now, we're going to deal with this later, kick the can down the road for 1,001 different reasons and justifications. That moment never came. And I think that's a really critical factor in what enabled us to reach this stage now.
So can we say that finally there has been a shift in the approach of the Israeli defense establishment, in the approach of the Israeli political echelons, and that no longer, ever again, never again, will we permit for clear, present, pronounced, self-proclaimed dangers to our people and to our state to mass on our borders or distant from our borders? Have we now moved into the mindset, and can we take it as given that we are now in the position whereby such dangers will not be allowed to grow and to develop, but rather they will be crushed while they're young and while they're weak?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes. When you listen to the Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, he says, this is our lesson from the 7th of October. We detect a threat, we take it out. Yeah. There's no waiting, there's no delay. It's detection, it turns into a firepower strike. and look at all the arenas: Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, Judea and Samaria, where we haven't talked about it, but there's a massive counterterrorism operation. Iran. So it's the same pattern. Every time a threat is detected, whether it's an IED factory in Kalkilia or a nuclear factory in Isfahan, it's taken out. It's taken out, and it's taken out in time. This is the way to ensure our survival. This is reshaping the whole Middle East. This goes beyond survival. This is creating an ecosystem that we can thrive in, as well as moderate Arab Sunni powers that do exist here, that are happy that this is happening, and they're going to be our partners in the new future of this region. So we have every reason to be optimistic, Benjamin. I'm very optimistic about our future today.
Well, it begs the question, Yaakov, and we won't deal with it now, but I want to put it out there for our listeners to consider. Assuming that these raids on Iran's nuclear weapons installations and all that's associated with those, assuming that they have had the effect of bringing about an end to, or rolling back by years, the Iranian nuclear ambitions, one would think that the Prime Minister might be eyeing the time and the moment as ripe for elections. So
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Let's say you're Prime Minister Netanyahu, right?
Let's say you are. You be Prime Minister Netanyahu. You do it because you have a more similar accent to him in English.
Why
so
would he?
You will be the Prime Minister. Go on, ask yourself the question.
Why would he run again? What could he possibly gain?
All right, you mentioned that last time. You said last time that he might turn around and say, "This is
now
what I leave for you."
Now I'm asking even more pointed. You've overseen the elimination and commanded and overseen the total reversal of our strategic situation from disaster to victory. The Iranian threat, which you have talked about...
It's not total, by the way. We want the hostages back.
No,
right? We can't not look at that.
I agree. When I say total, what I mean is when you compare the threats that we were facing on 7th of October and today, the victory is obvious. There's no need to interpret it too long. It's anybody who looks at it understands that Israel has come out on top.
Got an answer.
Why run again? What possible achievement would you want that you haven't gotten already?
Normalization.
Right.
He wants normalization. He wants that.
And that
to
can't be done
legacy
before the
issue.
next elections, you say?
Well, no, it could be if he was to
think
achieve
it cannot
that. If he can achieve that,
then he'd leave. You think?
No, I'm not going to predict whether he'd leave or not, but I'd be hard pressed to conceive of something more that he would want to achieve within the realm of politics. I don't know.
Normalization.
Just
with
by
Saudi Arabia, we're talking about.
Yeah, with the Saudis, although it doesn't necessarily have to be limited to the Saudis.
But they're the crown jewel.
Yeah, but just a couple of weeks ago, the media was all aflutter with the idea that there's going to be normalization with the Syrians. Right? This is a brand new, very, very overhauled Middle East. This is the first time that I believe the Prime Minister has used the phrase, "we are changing the face of the Middle East," and has used it accurately. I remember him saying it several times over ineffective operations, in my opinion, inside the Gaza Strip about Hamas in the past, saying, "we're reshaping the Middle East." Nonsense. I never believed it then. This time it does ring rather true, assuming that that which we think has been achieved in Iran has indeed been achieved in Iran. And so, Yaakov, I'm going to give you your last word, and then I'll give a last word. Anyone you want to thank? We've spoken about the Prime Minister thanking the President and God, the President thanking the Prime Minister and God. Anyone you particularly want to thank?
So my sons and I have gotten into the habit. We live close to an air base, and when we see the jets take off over our heads, it just comes very naturally to us. We salute them. We really do. We salute them. The gratefulness for the pilots, for the men and women of the Israeli Air Force, the ground crews, the radar operators, the command center operators, the intelligence directorate, which did its life-saving job, raised the alert, the Mossad. First and foremost, I am overwhelmed by gratitude because honestly, they have enabled, at the most personal level, me and my family, a future. They've guaranteed our future here. So my first thanks absolutely goes to them, and then everybody else who's involved in this incredible achievement, including the political echelon for its leadership. Absolutely everybody who's involved gets my thanks. I'm very grateful, and I'm very proud to be a citizen of this country today.
I want to thank President Trump. I don't think that he had to do this. I think that he did it because he believed it may have been in his interests and believed it may have been the right thing to do. But I don't think that the threat constituted the imminent threat to America that it does to the State of Israel. So I want to thank him very, very much.
Okay,
for
you
doing
said something there that I don't agree with. So
tell me, go on very quickly, because
I think this is absolutely a major threat to the United States.
No, I didn't say that it's not a major threat. I said that I don't think that it was perceived imminent. As being an imminent threat to America the way that we perceive it as imminent to us here in Israel.
That's true.
So I just want to thank him. It's not a sure thing. I know, for example, just to give everybody a little bit of context, when Prime Minister Ehud Olmert found that there was a nuclear reactor inside Syria under the auspices of Bashar al-Assad, a very different process. This was actually imported nuclear weapons knowledge from North Korea that the Syrians were onboarding, if you like. George W. Bush, who was appealed to by Prime Minister Olmert to handle this threat, for the Americans to handle this threat, demurred. And he said, no, I will not do it. I will not do it. I want it resolved diplomatically. Now, Olmert went and unilaterally dealt with it, ultimately. But George W. Bush, because of fatigue over Iraq and Afghanistan, said, we just can't handle it.
I'm actually glad that Bush said what he said.
Yeah, I agree with you. But Donald Trump could have said the same thing. That's true. Right? Donald Trump. And by the way, he could have said the same thing, particularly given that the isolationists have been very much
100%.
On the march, right? He could have easily said, I'm not going, right?
He could also say, you're doing so well, you don't need me.
I give you my blessing, you will continue to send you munitions, but I'm staying out of this, we're too fatigued. And he didn't. And so I want to say thank you, really, for that. By the way, people should know the same of another. Remember, George W. Bush was a Republican president of the United States, a friend of the State of Israel.
For sure.
Also, Iraq, right, in 1981, when then Prime Minister, in my opinion, the greatest of all the Prime Ministers of Israel, Menachem Begin, is certainly my hero. Menachem Begin sent the Israeli Air Force to detonate the Iraqi nuclear weapons program. Another Republican president, President Ronald Reagan, opposed it, actually sanctioned Israel for a brief period of time. So we do have to say thank you, right? And I don't think that we should be mealy-mouthed about it. I think it should be really a trumpeting of thanks.
I join that, but I also think the world should be thanking us, Benjamin.
Wait, before you come to that, because that might actually be the most important concluding comment. So I'm going to let you wrap up with that. So I do want to thank Trump. I want to thank the Prime Minister. Of course, I thank our intelligence services and our soldiers, our pilots, everybody who's engaged in this. I thank Israel. I thank Israel for being that anomaly of Jewish history. You know, you have this march of Jewish history that has been so predictable when it comes to the destruction, the ostracization, the banishing and the burning of Jews, that if you go to a community of Ashkenazi Eastern Jews anywhere in the Western world, you ask them where their grandparents or great-grandparents came from, they will tell you that they came from Germany and Russia and Belarus and Poland and Czechoslovakia and everywhere and anywhere. And they came from those countries because if they didn't leave, they would be massacred, basically, right? And Israel is the anomaly in that march of Jewish history. Israel is the one that says, you're not going to put the hangman's noose around our necks. We will rise up. We will cut this. We'll release ourselves from your proverbial gallows, and then we will fight you, and we will destroy you, and we will eliminate the threat that you pose towards us. So I'm very thankful to be part of that, and I, of course, am extremely proud to be an Israeli and to be in Israel. You know, you have the ballistic missiles being fired on us, and we're all going to the shelters, we're all going to the safe rooms, we're all having our evenings and our nights disrupted. But you know what? At a time like this, there's nowhere I'd rather be.
Yeah,
isn't that quite remarkable? There's nowhere I'd rather be. I wouldn't want to be anywhere but right here.
Same here. I wouldn't be anywhere except here. I think actually in many ways Israel is a reversal of Jewish history. In other words, this is the state that the Jewish people were once in, a significant military force, the ability to defend their lives and interests and be a significant power in the Middle East. So in some ways we've kind of turned the clock back, and I think that's has no parallel. Maybe that's for another podcast, but that's actually breaking almost breaking the laws of human history to do that, to reverse the clock back to 3,000 years. And I think that the world owes Israel a thank you. I really do, because I would compare us to Britain on the eve of World War II. Is what our role here is. This is a frontline state dealing with a global evil, the menace of jihadism. And if it wasn't us on the front line, the West, and some in the West know this, like in the German chancellor who said, yes, Israel's doing our dirty work. He knows what he's talking about. Israel's doing the world's dirty work mostly for it, with the exception of President Trump, who absolutely deserves major credit for his decision. Totally agree. But on the whole, it's Israel. It's day in, day out, it's Israel. And yes, we're fighting for our lives, but our victory is also the victory of the free world. And those who don't recognize that are simply blind.
No, Yaakov, if it's good enough for the Prime Minister to do so, and if it's good enough for the President of the United States to do so, it's good enough for me to do so. I truly thank God for giving us the ability to defend ourselves, to protect ourselves, and quite frankly, without wanting to get too into this, because I'm not really qualified to do so, for keeping his promise to the Jewish people. We're here, we are a people that has been reconciled with its land. We live in a land that has been reconciled with its people, and when those two things come about, there is a glorious outcome. There's no question about it. And I remind everybody, we're just getting going. And one final thing, Yaakov. And
not in this podcast, though. Not
on this podcast. This podcast is about to wrap. Imminently. It's imminently going to wrap. But there's one thing that I do want to say. There's an idea that Menachem Begin was Israel's most Jewish prime minister. Okay? Do with that what you will, but that's an idea that's out there. And when Begin sent the pilots to bomb the Iraqi nuclear facility, he had a sidekick, a right-hand man there by the name of Yechiel Kadishai. You familiar with this fellow?
No.
Kadishai, if you like, might have been his Ron Dermer. Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe, but he was a bit more of a political advisor in addition to a policy advisor, Kadishai. And Kadishai said that for the entire duration of the mission, do you know what Menachem Begin did? He paced back and forth throughout his tiny little office and by heart recited Tehillim, recited Psalms. So, there's that old adage, there are no atheists in a foxhole.
Yeah,
right?
I agree with that. Maybe the exception is David Ben-Gurion. Maybe that's another episode.
Maybe, but we're not going to do that now. Yaakov, great to be discussing that with you. Thank you very much for your time. And for now, for this episode of the show, it's over and out.
Over and out.